right, good morning, y'all. This is Ben at Bates Nursery. I'm one of the landscape specialists here, and today we are talking about watering. Big topic. We're going into summertime. Last month I did a talk on planting, and this is kind of a follow-up. I mean, a lot of folks have gotten a lot of plant material in the ground, and knowing how to take care of that as far as watering for the first year is really only second to planting. And we're going to talk about kind of what to expect, time schedule, what to look for in our plants to know when to water. And, maybe we'll talk about some methods and different ways to kind of help you water your garden. And please feel free to ask questions. I know there's probably way more questions than I can even address right off the bat. So, let me know about your questions about watering. I've tried a few different systems and seen successes and failures. So definitely using the tools to your advantage and knowing the signs of the plant under water stress are big deals. We're just getting out of spring. So, we had kind of a wet end of winter, a wet early spring, and all of a sudden we're getting 2 weeks without much rain and some hot temperatures. It's supposed to reach up maybe into the 90s today. So we are seeing a lot of freshly planted plant material showing some stress, where even if you are watering it every few days, it may not be enough just because of how dry the soil is out there. So that's the first thing I'd like to mention, and y'all can look back at my last video on planting, but kind of what you're putting that plant in will kind of determine your watering schedule. So if it's just going into heavy clay like we tend to have around here, that can actually hold a lot of water, especially in the spring, and then it can actually get really dry in the summer. So you get two extremes. We highly recommend a soil conditioner. We make a landscape soil conditioner, which has a lot of awesome components that will help your soil not only drain, but also allow it to retain moisture when it needs to. So we kind of want a conditioner that does both things. I've recommended Pine Fines, but that's really only for a plant that needs super good drainage. It does not want wet feet, kind of like a needled evergreen, or maybe like sedum, one of these that just likes to stay dry. Otherwise, having a good soil conditioner with your soil can really help it work like a sponge and let it hold that water and then dry out when it needs to. And I'll just mention Landscape Soil Conditioner is a product we sell here at Bates Nursery, made by Earth Mix. So awesome product. Throw that in your hole and it'll really help retain water. Okay, initial watering. If you're planning to plant, you already have the first 2-3 weeks possibly are really a intensive watering period, depending on the plant. I would start off watering daily, unless it's a needled evergreen or maybe a sedum or something that really doesn't like a lot of water. I would plan on watering daily, especially if it's a tree or a shrub or annuals. Those can dry out very quickly. If it's in a container, we're not really going to talk too much about container watering today, but a container will typically need a lot more water right off the bat. So yeah, initially for the first week, maybe even 2, you should look at that plant daily. Just go take a look at it. And you would be surprised how intuitive those signs of stress are on a plant. But check it. Maybe stick your hand underneath that plant. Check the top inch of soil. If it's really dry and it's just powder in your hands, go ahead and soak that thing. If it's really wet and sticky, then I would skip a watering and just kind of see how that plant is playing out. But probably almost daily the first week or 2. And then you're going to want to taper it. We don't like to see people watering daily throughout the summer. A lot of times that's excessive and it's just a lot of work on you. If you can soak that soil when you water it, and maybe we can do like a little PSA video on that. If you really soak the soil when you water it, it should be able to last a lot longer between waterings. And that's kind of what we're looking for. If you really soak your soil, those roots will start to seek out that water that you have in the ground, and that'll really lead to long-term success. So we will use a term sometimes in the industry called deep and infrequent watering, meaning you shouldn't have to water every day. If you can water very thoroughly and deeply in your garden bed, it should allow it several days before it really goes dry, if not longer, depending on your soil. So versus, say, using a watering can to do, a big tree or shrub where that water will evaporate quickly and maybe you'll have to water it the next day. If you were to water it, say, with a shower head or a hose and let it really soak onto that plant for 10-15 minutes, it should last a lot longer before that soil dries out. So deep and infrequent watering, that's what we like to see, versus every day for months. It's just not good for you or the plant. So yeah, initial watering, I will mention some of the signs, and we'll get into that with plants later. Some plants show signs, some plants don't. I have a Macrophylla Hydrangea right here. I believe this is, blue Enchantress. So that's a really nice Macrophylla Hydrangea. Mostly blue. Sometimes they can turn to pink depending on your soil acidity. Nice black stems, but they've got these really juicy, water-hungry blooms and really big leaves and really soft stems. So, maybe by the end of the day today, this plant may be leaning over. Sometimes we'll call that flagging, where the bloom will literally dip. You'll see this a lot in like Annabelle hydrangeas, where they kind of have the long stems. But if you see that bloom tipping over, or if you see the leaves tipping over, you would be surprised how much water these guys can take for the first month. So Macrophylla hydrangeas, very water hungry right off the bat. They're going to be very dramatic about it. I've had some planted for about 3 weeks, and I'm still doing it almost every other day, maybe every 3 days. And the soil can feel kind of moist, but if those things are literally just flagging over and they're not swimming in water, I'm just giving them a good soak every evening or every morning. With the inverse, and y'all could probably barely see it here, I've got a Panicle Hydrangea. This is Quickfire, one of my favorites. It's got a nice pink, red, open style panicle bloom. These are super tough. Versus the Macrophylla, you probably won't have to water this half as much. Maybe for the first couple weeks you'll have to water it, but they're not as dramatic. They will take a long period of dry before they start to flag or flop over. So if you have a dry, sunny spot, a Panicle Hydrangea is going to be a much easier choice for you to manage. The Macrophylla may be able to take it, but you're going to have some initial hardship watering. So, plant selection and the way they deal with that drought can kind of determine how much you water. Again, as well as what you have in your soil. If you have pure sand and it drains overnight, then you may have to water quite a bit. If it's heavy clay, then you may have to water less. So just respond to your plant, respond to the soil. I do have other things like grasses. These probably won't show you as much of a sign of heat stress. Now, this is Switchgrass. This is a new one, Prairie Dog, kind of a cute name. And, this is a prairie-style native grass, and you see these put into really drought-tolerant landscapes. Those initial few weeks, I would still water it every other day, even if it's not showing signs. But as long as it's growing happily, you could probably back off quite a bit on these. But they're not going to be as dramatic as a hydrangea. So just knowing the signs of certain plants, how dramatic they are whenever they're dry, and that can kind of help you make the right decision for watering. Like sedum right here, you really won't see a sign of it going too dry, maybe a little bit of burning. But if it's too wet, you could get brown spots, some rot, some leaf drops. So this one would respond to staying excessively wet, but not dry. So yeah, just knowing your plant, kind of which direction of the spectrum, does it like water, does it not like water, can help you make that decision. Okay, so we've gotten out of spring establishment and we're going into summer. I mean, we're already hitting 90 degrees. I imagine in the summer, usually we have a few week or a month dry spell somewhere in there. A few Augusts ago, it got really dry. So just be prepared. If you're planning on taking a trip for a few weeks in the summer, maybe have a system set up to help you water it, or have someone you trust water it, or, wait for some of these really tender plants till after like a summer trip so you can just be there to check it. No amount of schedule I can give you can beat just looking at the plant and seeing what's going on. So just be able to be there through the summer, at least check it 3 to 4 times a week would be ideal. If this is a yucca or a native grass, you could probably only check on it a couple times a week just to make sure, check that soil, just depending on the water tolerance of your plant. But 3 to 4 times a week, I'd like to at least go by your plants, walk out there, look at them, maybe check the ground, see if it's cracking dry or if it's still really wet, and then adjust your watering schedule. I mean, once you get into the first month of summer, you should kind of be able to stay on that same schedule for watering, just depending on your soil and what method you're using to water. So, and yeah, once you find that sweet spot, your plants are taking off. It seems like your watering schedule is right. They're not drooping. They're not staying wet. Stick with that through the summer. And then when fall comes, you can really kind of taper off of that even more. So we did mention deep and infrequent watering. When you water, we like to soak. A lot of us, I would say all of us, when we first start watering, we try to soak it. We just wash all that dirt out of the hole. We wash the mulch away. It happens to me all the time. And what I usually try to do is get my hose at a level. These little shower heads really help with washout, and get that hole saturated lightly before you really start putting water onto it. If you can kind of prime that soil, get that mulch wet, whenever you go to really put water on it, that shouldn't all wash away. So a nice kind of light watering across your plants initially can keep you from washing all your soil away, which is holding that precious moisture into the soil. So yeah, just kind of learning how to use these tools. Like I said, maybe we can do a video on how to use some of these tools. Just depending on what you're using. I usually don't like one of these little jets, turned up to, what is this one? I think it actually is jet. You're just going to dig a hole to China in your bed. That's not what we're looking for, but something like a mist or a shower setting would be all right. Kind of one of the downsides with these is, it promotes us watering these plants from a distance or from above. So we just want to be careful that we're getting that water on the soil where it needs to go. Water on the leaves is a whole nother topic. But generally we don't want water on the leaves of our plants. We want it on the ground where it's going to be useful to the plant. It's not going to cause fungus issues on the leaves. So yeah, these are great. The shower heads I have on the wands are really nice because you can just stand there and put it underneath the plant without having to bend over and all that, and it really promotes good watering practice. So yeah, we talked about some of the different plants, kind of what you want to do going into summer, testing it 3-4 times a week, checking those plants. If you really go all out, check underneath it, check the soil, and see how that feels, and just kind of adjust your watering based on needs. So yeah, that was just kind of the basics on watering schedule. I know it's really open, but you just kind of got to find what works for your site. I have a house that's up on a hill, and then we also have a creek bed. So when it's down on the low creek, that stuff I hardly have to water, if at all. Up near the house, I'm watering every day, every other day right now. So knowing location, how your soil holds water, maybe that'll help you determine what to plant where. We really like when we can choose the right plant so that you don't have to really put too much water into the system unnecessarily. So yeah, I mentioned a little plants. I'll talk about a few plants, and then I'll kind of talk about some watering systems. I actually have some drip systems here. There's so much stuff out there. There's water bags, soaker hoses, drip systems, misters, sprinklers. I feel like there's a million methods. There's some good ones. There's some that don't work so well around here, so we'll talk about those after I mention a couple plants here. So I mentioned the sedum. That's a great kind of ground cover. We have some taller sedums. These are extremely drought tolerant. They love growing in rocks. They love growing in gravel. They love growing in full sun spots. So, when we're talking about watering input, once you get this past the first month, I really don't see a huge need for water unless it's bone dry. So sedum, kind of succulent. You can tell it holds a lot of water. This is really going to be great for water-wise. I've got an iris. So some irises can take it, some bulbs can't. This is a Siberian Iris, I believe, so ruffled velvet. These can actually grow in moist bottomlands. They may not like growing in the water, But if it's a moist spot, these things are going to thrive. I don't think that they would necessarily die in a dry spot, but they're going to really grow and bloom better if it's constantly wet. So something like an iris, Siberian iris, if you can keep that water up through the summer, it should look better and it should perform better year to year, set more blooms, more energy in the roots and all that. I do have the Macrophylla Hydrangea, Blue Enchantress. That's a classic. The Macrophyllas are starting to bloom like crazy right now, so you should come on out and see what we have. Again, part sun, part shade. If you put in some shade, it'll be a little easier, but these things can be dramatic. These big heads, soft, tender leaves, they need a little more water than your average bear. I've got some Carex, sweet flag over here. So this is another boggy plant right next to this iris. They would actually go good together in a bed. You know, Carex actually will burn up in full sun if it gets really dry. Acorus, not Carex. Carex is sedge, which would perform similarly. Acorus, sweet flag, really thrives in a wet spot. I mean, even if it's always constantly wet, just like the iris, they'll do fine, and they'll spread a little more, they'll grow better, and they'll put little catkins on if they stay wet. So that's one that's great for a wet spot. If it goes bone dry, you might see some burning on it. So that's how it would show signs. I've got a yucca. So, you know, these are put into desert gardens, xeriscape gardens. Wonderful, unique blooms on these. I do recommend these sometimes in pots. I mean, they can give you a nice modern architectural look. The great thing is they are not water hungry. You really don't need to overwater these guys. Great for a drought tolerant bed, a pot that'll go dry. So the yuccas perform really well. You just get a totally different look with them. And then I mentioned the switchgrasses. So, you know, the native switchgrasses, great for a vertical element. Some of these will get 6, 7, 8 feet tall if you really want something striking. They'll put seed heads on, and very water-wise. So this thing, really, you shouldn't be watering it more than a few times during the summer, a week. And through the winter, really, you should leave it alone. They don't like to stay wet. That's usually a big killer of these over the winter. So these grasses, super drought tolerant. And feel free to ask me about any specific plants. You know, some perform better than others in a wet spot. So, yeah, Panicle Hydrangea, I mentioned that too, a little bit more tolerant than the Macrophylla. So, yeah, we'll switch to watering systems. So I have a hose up here. I hope all y'all know what a hose is. That's kind of like bare bones, you know. Stick that out under the plants with a low kind of drip. We don't want to wash out our soil. You can water things with just a hose with no end on it. Put your thumb under the end. The biggest thing we want to avoid is watering all over the leaves of our plants. That doesn't really have any benefit. So with this, we want to make sure we're sticking this hose underneath the plants. And that's where the soaker hoses come in. So this is a tree ring soaker. You can buy like 50-foot soakers and all sorts of stuff. Essentially, this is taking out the guesswork from you having to sit there and get the pressure right and get it just soaking into your soil. So they've got little pores in this rubber, and whenever you put it, it's usually got a low pressure adapter on it. It'll just slowly seep through these pores, and it'll soak your soil. The downside of that is you need to turn these on for quite a while. They don't use a lot of water, but you need to run these for longer than you would a hose. So this is slow soaking action. In a veggie garden, I'm running this for at least an hour, maybe 2 hours to really soak that soil. Maybe you can use a timer, stick a timer or something on it. Got a little timer here. You know, you can buy all sorts of little timers. This is a mechanical timer. You know, there's some really cool stuff out there with tech. There is cloud-based app timers. You can, you know, monitor your water usage, your watering schedule from your phone. And some of these app-based digital Wi-Fi water valves basically can use local weather data to help you know when to water. So, you know, these are all great tools. It doesn't really replace you looking at your plants occasionally and making sure your system's doing what you need it to do. So, but once you get it, you know, under a good schedule, keep with that no matter what you're using. Again, the soakers, I've used those. I do like them, especially for veggie gardens, initial plantings. These things do have a time limit. So if you leave these outside 2, 3 years, maybe 4, that's about all you'll get with them. So they do decompose. Just know that. But yeah, soaker hoses can be a great way for, the beginner to not just wash out their beds. Again, I mentioned the sprayer. These are fine. You just need to really watch out for watering practices, like I said. If it's annuals and stuff, you'll be fine. But if we're just, destroying the heck out of the leaves of our plant, I will say knocking insects off your plant is a great use for these. So if you're knocking bugs off with water, a great use. Maybe not so great for soaking your soil. Sprinkler. So these are great and bad. I usually don't suggest these in landscapes. I really think these rotary sprinklers are made for lawns for the most part, because these will cover a large area. You can roll them around. There's all sorts of stands and stuff for these to get them higher. Going back to the water on the leaves thing, though, we really want this water underneath the plants where it's going to be used. A lot of times these will just generally just hit everything in the bed. Everything's going to get watered at different rates. It's really hard to control where the water's going with these. So I really don't recommend these rotary sprinklers, any of them, for a garden bed unless it's like the only choice you have. So I usually keep these on lawns, not in beds. They can work, but not ideal. Good old watering wand. These are a good investment. Really, we all swear by them. You can take the tip off if you don't want the shower head, if you just want to get under your plants. It's got a little filter in here, so that's what we call the shower head. So it'll give you a good, even spray pattern that tends not to wash stuff out. So great tool. You can get down in the plants. What I got here? You can get down, so instead of watering the top of the hydrangea, and getting all this bloom wet and making it fade and stuff, we can use this while standing to get underneath it, get a little valve on it. That'll keep you from wasting water from plant to plant. So these are a great investment. They make all sorts of fancy ones. You can spend a ton of money. Just the base level one here, $30, that'll get the job done. It'll last you for a long, long time. So I highly recommend everyone have a shower wand for your landscape.
Not to mention, you can also buy the shower heads themselves and put them on the end of your hose.
Yeah, and you can screw that shower head. It's all the same fitting, so the nice thing is it's all universal. And you can buy higher quality parts. So if you're just beating it to death, you're becoming an avid gardener, you can get higher quality parts and just screw them on. So awesome little tools there. Most of this stuff is Dram, which is a pretty good company that's been around for a long time for watering, so can't really say anything bad about Dram products. Have a watering can. I figured I'd go down to basics here. So, watering cans are great for house plants, for potted plants, things in containers where you just can't really get a hose to, or it's easier just to walk. The downside is these are usually 1, 2, 3 gallon cans. Sometimes we want to be putting 10 gallons underneath these plants at a slow rate. So this can really limit you, especially if you have a plant that's way far away from your house. These watering cans, sometimes I feel like we're just not going to get anywhere near what we need to really soak that soil. So again, great for containers and stuff, or if you're really close to the spigot. But most watering cans are not good for initial watering or summertime watering on trees and shrubs. So yeah, awesome little tools. We just don't want to run back and forth 200 times to soak our tree. Got a couple tools here. So moisture testers, these can be a nice tool. It just really depends on what you're using it for. I usually use, the thing that God gave us to check the moisture, the finger. This thing has so many more sensors on it that can tell you how the soil feels, if it's wet or not. Sometimes just touching the soil can tell you a lot more than the moisture meter can. So, use these lightly, and I wouldn't rely on these 100%. They're not 100% accurate. They shouldn't be your only way to tell moisture, but they can kind of give you an idea. Again, maybe you use this and then start using your hands to check the soil. And once you know what this is reading and what to look for, maybe you can just use your hands. So, it's a good kind of training wheels thing, but I don't usually use a soil moisture meter for everything or long term. But they do have some good ideas and ratings on the back for like how moist they should be. Y'all probably can't see that there. But, you know, there are numbers and stuff that tell you what the plants need. They're not 100% accurate, so I use those sparingly. Soil moist. So I have this here actually not to recommend it because it's not a product that's for a lot of applications. This is like water holding crystals, which is a really cool idea. They even make water tree. There's a company called Tree Diaper, and it literally is like a fabric bag filled with water holding crystals. And the idea is this holds water for a long time and slowly releases it into the soil. You mix this into your soil and it'll hold that water for a long time. The biggest problem with that is, what if we don't want it to hold as much water as it is? Once you have these in there, your soil is going to hold water. So sometimes this can keep plants too wet. I think a lot of times we recommend this in tropical plants or indoor plants or potted plants that really dry out very fast. And if you're going to use this product, you just really need to know how to check your soil, because if it's staying wet and this stuff won't go dry, you could be a little bit too wet all the time. So use the soil moist sparingly. I don't usually recommend it unless you have a special situation, like maybe you have horsetail reed, which loves it wet in a planter, and you just can't water it enough. This would probably be a good idea for that. But for like trees and shrubs, a better idea for slow release of water are tree bags. And, you know, these are a great tool. It's not for everybody. And a lot of times, if you have good watering practice, or if you can get a hose out there to a soaker, this is just going to be too much of an investment. But these are reusable. So if you plan on planting a lot of trees, this may be a good investment. And essentially, it's just a big bag with a permeable membrane. And once you fill this bag, it should leach water for usually 24, 36, 72 hours, usually 3 days or so. This will kind of slowly leach water out. And the idea is you don't have to constantly go back and check it, fill it a couple times a week, and it's just going to make your water schedule easier. So, you know, if you're a busy person and you have trees way far away from the house, this can really help your water schedule, take a little bit of guesswork out, but you still need to refill this bag. So just know that these bags are going to have to be refilled. So it's just kind of up to you. It just takes a little bit of the waiting and standing there out of the whole equation.
So we have a question from Stephanie. What do you recommend for very established trees? I have a huge magnolia that is looking stressed. Not sure if it needs water or if it's just directing all its energy to the blooms right now.
Sure. Big trees can be tough. Usually past the year, I don't recommend having to do a lot of water unless you know it's a real tender tree. Magnolias are not particularly water hungry. More often what I see from magnolias this time of year is like a delayed winter damage, and that does happen on them, and it can be a delayed reaction. In fact, I have a neighbor that has 2 magnolias in their yard, 20 feet apart, and one of them looks amazing. One of them has 0 leaves on it. So with magnolias that old, I wouldn't think watering is something I should even address. Past 3, 4, 5 years, any water that you could put underneath it is probably just a drop in the bucket for that, to use a water saying. But yeah, I wouldn't be watering that magnolia. If anything, they could probably get excessive leaf drop underneath it and start getting mulch up on the trunk. But I would leave it. And I mean, you could send us a picture, bring us in a picture. It may just be delayed frost damage. And that's fairly common in magnolias if we have kind of a long freeze coming out of the winter like we did. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about the water on it. I would worry about, like I said, that kind of delayed freeze damage. Like I said, send us a picture. They can kind of grow out of that. If you notice it is extremely dry, like if our oak trees, which have a taproot, are losing leaves, which can happen in a long summer drought, maybe I would consider watering it, but you would really need to see signs of extended drought. And same goes for pretty much all mature trees. Past a few years, I usually don't worry about watering them unless you know there's like an issue or it's just super dry there. So where was I? I think I did get all those watering systems. I was going to mention like drip systems and in-ground irrigation systems. I actually do have my own little drip system box here. I think drip systems are sometimes underutilized by homeowners. We do not sell the parts to the drip irrigation system. Excuse me. But you can get them at typically Lowe's, Home Depot, and it's pretty cost effective. The nice thing compared to the soakers is this can be a permanent tool, and you can reuse these hoses year after year. You can change the configuration. You know, if you're somebody who likes to tinker, you know, you have the Lego mindset, these are really awesome systems. You just basically either buy a feeder hose. You can use like a 1/2 inch, I think, or it's 3/8 hose that attaches to your faucet with a little regulator there, and it's just going to bump down the water pressure, and then essentially you just stick little heads off of that main hose. So there's a million different configurations for these. You can buy whole kits, you can make them yourself out of parts, but essentially you can just run this through your garden and you can put a dripper on each individual plant. So you can be very precise with these systems, but they are made for kind of someone who's being a little more detail oriented, a little more specific about watering per plant. You can get different drip rates on these: gallon, 2 gallon per minute, 3 gallon per minute. So if you want to like watch water, or you want to really count the gallons it takes for the plants, you can do that with this system. So the drip systems I think are really cool. They're pretty easy, and you just need to hook them up to your faucet. And if you have, say, like a digital timer on that, I mean, talk about not ever having to go out there and mess with hoses and stuff. I mean, this can be a really neat system, especially if you have permanent beds that you know aren't going to change. You can just leave this system in there forever. So yeah, drip systems. This one's Mr. Landscaper. There's a bunch of different systems out there. Most of them are pretty compatible. You can buy tools to help you make the system. So awesome little idea, drip irrigation. Unfortunately, it would just be too much for us to carry all the parts, but I think Lowe's or Home Depot does carry it. So yeah, drip systems are awesome. In-ground irrigation systems, you know, you'll have to hire somebody to do those. You can buy drip attachments to go on the heads of in-ground irrigation. So if your irrigation system has rotary sprinklers hitting your plants, sometimes you can just swap those heads out for little drippers to run to your bed, and that's a cool option. They make mister emitters that go real low on the plant, so those can be useful. I just usually watch out. In-ground irrigation systems I think are great for keeping your lawn looking good. Sometimes if it's running over into the bed and you're hitting the leaves with that same system, it can cause a lot of damage. So yeah, in-ground systems are great if you have them dialed in and on schedule right. If they're just kind of running all the time, they can cause a lot of damage. So and they're expensive. But yeah, I'm trying to think of any other really prevalent systems out there. Like I said, the water bags. I'm sure there's some other systems some people have tried out there. I was talking earlier about a very old-fashioned method of burying terracotta pots in the ground, and you fill the terracotta pot with water and it just slowly releases in the ground. Same idea as the water bag, just a very old-fashioned method. You know, that would work too if you're going for just something unique. So yeah, that's kind of the general gist I have. I'm sure y'all have some questions for me, so yeah, just let me know.
Yeah, please type or comment your questions. Whether you're watching us on Facebook or you're here with us on Zoom, we'll be happy to take them. Ben, one other thing, rain barrels. That's a good way to
rain barrels.
Water.
I've had a rain barrel. In fact, actually, this one came off of a rain barrel. So the cool thing is a rain barrel has a water spigot on it typically.
Yep.
You can plug a drip system straight into your rain barrel. So you can have... now, the pressure may not be ideal in a water barrel, but if you have it up high, that gravity can feed your garden. Yeah, I mean, you could tap right into that without having to use water cans or anything. And I usually have my rain barrel close to my veggie garden. That's going to need the most water. So, you know, put that rain barrel up high and you can just run a hose down in there. And then if you ever need to switch to city water because your rain barrel's dry, then you could do that. 10 seconds.
Ben, we got a question here. How do you feel about the tree diaper product?
I haven't used them personally. I like the idea of the tree diaper more than sticking soil moist in the ground because you can't really control this after the fact. So I think the tree diaper sounds like a good idea. The one thing I've heard is that they are kind of decomposable or biodegradable. I'm not sure if they're really biodegradable, but it is essentially like a diaper. So I mean, it's that kind of soft fabric with gel in it. If you pierce that outer layer, you're probably going to have a mess on your hands of like gel everywhere. So I think it's a great product for the first couple years of a tree, especially if it's in a dry spot, just to keep you from having to water every day. But I think there's a time limit on those tree diapers. So where the tree bag could probably last for, you know, a decade if you treat it right. The diapers, I would say, you know, a couple years. If a weed eater hits it, I think it's done. But if you get them cheap enough, I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't look like we have any other questions at the moment. So maybe we'll wait another minute here and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, we'll wait another minute. You know, I didn't bring any needled evergreens up here. You know, I probably don't need to say it again because people have probably already heard enough of me loving juniper. But, you know, in the summer when it's dry, juniper really needs no help. So if we're talking needled evergreens like juniper, sometimes arborvitae, probably don't need to water those as much. In fact, we see a lot of issues with overwatering needled evergreens. So, you know, if you have a dry, sunny spot, picking things like yucca or juniper or things like that can kind of lighten your load a little bit. And the tree should live there longer without as much input. Right plant, right place. We really like helping people find the right plant to go in that place so they're not having to do work constantly to enjoy their garden.
Crucial.
Okay.
I think that that about does it.
Okay. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
One more. All this sounds great, but what do you do with the equipment at the end of the season?
That's a great one. I brought all my drip irrigation hoses in here in a 5-gallon hardware store bucket. So, you know, I've got a small shed at the back of my property. It is bursting out of the seams with like pruners and hose stuff, fertilizer, all these products. Yeah, so the soaker hose, that would be a big one, whether you got a debate to leave it out or not. Every season you leave the soaker hose in the ground, the more it's going to degrade. So soaker hose, probably a great idea to pull up at the end of the year, clean it off, hang it up where it's dry so it lasts a lot longer. With the, you know, with the drip systems, that's actually like a black rubber. I would just leave this outside in the garden all winter. And in fact, a lot of people just mulch over this stuff. So yeah, if you go with a longer lasting system, just leave it out in the ground. That way you don't have to store it. But yeah, I use a 5-gallon bucket for all my little fittings and tools and stuff for these. You know, hoses and stuff. I really like having hooks on the wall to like wrap all my hoses around. But yeah, just depending on what you choose, maybe you won't have to store it. A lot of these things degrade in UV, so putting certain things under the mulch is not a bad idea. We just don't want to forget they're there and stick a shovel in the ground and break our drip system. I have done it.
Okay, that seems to be it then.
Okay. Well, y'all just let us know if you have any more questions. We are accessible many different ways. Come out here and talk to us and, you know, bring us your plan. If you don't know if it's too wet or too dry or what you're doing wrong, please come talk to us. Bring us a picture or a sample, and we'd love to kind of talk you through it, and we want everyone to succeed. So y'all come see us and have a good weekend.